1999 to 2016. And as a matter of fact, on this past Friday, when we were out of session, I had the privilege of meeting over at the Atlanta Food Bank, and the U.S. Health General was there, and we met with some members of the Sarah Group and people from all over the state of Georgia in a roundtable discussion with the feds, with the federal government about what we can do here in Georgia. And I believe there was supposed to be a big announcement today from the feds about the opioid crisis. And my one plea to the general was, you know, they keep talking about the $60 billion that all the states are going to get, but they keep talking about money, but we never get the money. And as you know, we got about $11.5 million in the original round. So part of what we're doing is setting the foundation for when that money does come down from the federal government, that we will have existing programs in the foundation so that we can utilize the money more effectively and efficiently. The first part of the bill deals with patient brokering. And this past summer in 2017, I went around the state, and I was probably in some of your counties where we had forums. And some of the forums, like we have up in Gainesville's had consecutive forums for Northeast Georgia, and I guess they've had about 5 forums. And it is nothing in these forums to attract 500 to 600 people, because the opioid epidemic affects so many families and individuals. So the issues that are in this bill and the ideas that are in this bill did not come from me. It came from what we heard in these forums. We had 2 forums in Albany, Georgia. We went to Tifton. But the main concentrated area that we focused on was the metropolitan Atlanta area. And as you know, with Missy Owens at the zone, Cobb County's had several forums. Cherokee County, Forsyth County's had several, and in my home county of Gwinnett. So one of the things that we heard from families was 2 things. And there were things that I had actually never heard of, and one is called patient brokering. And that's what the first section of this bill addresses. Patient brokering is when a healthcare facility pays individuals a referral fee for sending an addict to their treatment program. And when Ms. Whitney and I started looking at this, we looked at the state of Florida, which has a very good law that they passed into a very good piece of legislation that they passed into law in Florida, and we actually started copying their bill because we had no template to go on. So this would be like when someone may come from Florida and comes up to Georgia and may go across the street, like to the church over there, and try and recruit addicts. And with the promise that they would give them an airline ticket or a bus ticket to go to Florida. And the Attorney General in Florida calls them flop houses. And they're concentrated from like what I read in the newspaper, from like Daytona down to West Palm Beach. And they give them the promise that they're going to get off their substance, whatever it is. But unfortunately, what they take them down there for is for either their family members to pay with private money, or to use other insurance or Medicaid, or I don't know what else, but to get them down there. So that was the first part of the bill. It mirrors the legislation from Florida. I did hear some concerns about kickback language, and this does copy the federal law and stark laws about kickbacks and financial kickbacks. And I met with the hospital associations, and I also met with some substance abuse companies. And in particular, we have a brand new one that's located in Dahlonega, Georgia. And I met with them for an hour, because our main goal on this patient brokering is not to interfere with our current patient referral patterns, where you have Dr. A that refers to Dr. B, or Dr. A that refers to Hospital A. my other concern was that a lot of hospitals own their own behavioral health facilities, and to make sure that there's nothing in this bill that interferes with those referral patterns. And I think working with the hospital associations that we accomplished that goal, and they feel comfortable now with the language. That language was not in the original Senate version that passed. The second part of the bill is the Commission on Substance Abuse and Recovery, and I can go through the bill, but I'm just giving you a general overview. The Commission on Substance Abuse and Recovery is composed with an executive director, and I believe it's 15 different agencies. I have had concerns that, you know, it could be too big, but one of the things that we found when we started working on this issue was that the epidemic affects every single agency in the state of Georgia. And every agency wants the money and wants to build up their silo and their fiefdom and wants to own the issue of opioid, but it really goes across every single layer. And that was one of the reasons that we have so many different groups are in the on that particular board. The purpose of it is to, like I said, cut across those barriers, and also to accumulate the overdose data and the statistics, working with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Another thing that we heard from these forums across the state was making sure that prevention and education is a key component, especially education with youth, and knowing that substance abuse is occurring at a much earlier age. The third section, Section 3 of the bill, is also something that we heard from the families, and it's repeated drug testing and unnecessary drug testing. When the families were looking at their bills, they were seeing that they were being charged for either testing that did not get done or over-testing. And if you look at page 7, it talks about upcoding, unbundling, billing an individual for multiple co-pay amounts, billing for drug testing that was not performed, and billing for excess number of drug tests that are found to be medically unnecessary. I think that was one of the infuriating things of the families. And the last part of the bill on page 8 deals with what are the penalties for engaging in fraudulent insurance under this code section. So as this bill has been working through the Senate and coming over to the House, we have also been working on the budget, and I appreciate all the House members on the Appropriations Committee working with us. And I just wanted to tell you some of the things, I had written them down, some of the money that we had put into the budget. One of the biggest pieces is we had put into the budget, and hopefully the House is going to agree. I know that's going to go to conference committee. But one of the things we had put in was $500,000 for neonatal abstinence syndrome. And we are doing very good throughout all of our districts with the peer-to-peer support with the pilot programs in the emergency rooms. And this takes the peer-to-peer to another level in the neonatal intensive care units. And this is where the mothers and the baby are both addicted. And so far, our pilot program has shown that we have a 3-day decrease in the number of days that the mother and the babies are staying in the Medicaid bed, so there is a decrease. So hopefully when we do get some of that money, we'll be able to increase that pilot program through other parts of the state when we can draw down more federal dollars. The other part is the $25 million that, as you know, that the governor put into the budget for children's mental health services. We're hoping that some of that money can be used, and it will be used, as I remember in the budget, designated for prevention and education of children. The last part and the biggest part of the budget that we heard from the families and from the accountability courts, from the judges, was the need for recovery centers. And we do have a needs-based grant program of $4 million in the Senate version of the budget for recovery centers that would mimic places like the Zone. The Zone is, I found 2 places in the state of Georgia when I was traveling. One was the Zone in Marietta, and the other one was in Albany, Georgia. And those 2 recovery centers are peer-to-peer support. And they do a great job, and that's the goal of that $4 million. It's a needs-based grant program. Communities that want to step up to the plate will be able to allocate that money and matching money to help them get started with recovery centers. So, Madam Chair, I'll be glad to walk line by line through the bill if you want to go through section by section, or
No, I think
everybody has.
we just let members, if you're ready, ask you questions.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right, questions for the senator. Okay, Representative Reinders.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for so much. We got a chance to visit a little bit in Albany,
Yeah, we did.
and I was so glad for you to come down there. I've got a list that's rather long, and I don't know how much indulgence Madam Chair is going to give me. Just in terms of
If you could just, I can't see you, so
Yeah,
I can't
look-
talk to you. What do you want to do? Go this way?
Yeah, I think we're
There
good
you
now.
go.
Thank you.
Okay.
And some of it is just, you've changed line 44, somebody has line 44 and 45 to meet a higher legal standard, and I'm not an attorney. And the substitute you added to knowingly and willfully.
Which line are you talking about? The
I'm talking about it
kickback?
shall be
44
unlawful
and
for any
45.
person. On the substitute. On line 45. B, which starts at 44, it shall be unlawful for any person. You've added, or it's been added to the substitute to knowingly and willfully. That's obviously a higher standard than what you originally had. Because if not, I can always say, well, I just didn't know, so therefore I get forgiveness.
Are you saying that's a bad thing?
I actually do.
Okay.
Actually, I think that's a good thing because,
But someone brought it to the attention that we might need a little wiggle room to say, I had no idea this bad thing was going on.
that would be a provider.
Okay. Do you know who that provider was?
I said that
Oh,
would be a provider.
But I didn't know
that
what,
could-
who changed this language is guess what I'm asking.
When I met with the hospital association,
Okay.
They had suggested, I think it was on line 37, healthcare provider network entity. They also added the language of any provider is exempt if they offer, they treat people with Medicare or Medicaid, and that's on line 61 and 62.
And these are things that I'm not necessarily looking for a fix. I just want to bring them to the attention so we can make the bill do what's intended. On 1, 2, and 3 on that same page, page 2, in terms of kickbacks and so forth and so on, I
Right.
think a simple provision at the end of all of those should be, or other forms of compensation. I can give you a kickback by giving you a trip to Europe.
Well, like I said, we copied this after the Florida law, and we also were mimicking, Ms. Witten had spent Christmas, the month of December, I know, because the federal kickback language law is so complicated.
Right.
And she spent that month making sure that we did not write anything in state law that did not accompany federal standards.
And my understanding
I'm
is-
not sure if that does.
And that's a good point, but my understanding is later, the contradiction to a certain extent would be something as it relates to potential double jeopardy. If you look at line 120, section G, or in addition to any other civil administration. And I just want to make sure that we do what the intent is. Because we wouldn't want a double jeopardy provision there. Which you're right, because if it's too broad, you got a problem. If it's too narrow, you got a problem.
Right,
Finding
and
that sweet spot.
I would have to defer to legislative council because, like I said, it's meant to copy that, and we want to make sure the Attorney General can enforce the law.
And Madam Chair, I'm just going to do a couple more if I may.
Okay.
On line 80 on page 3, however, nothing in this code section affects whether a healthcare provider. I'd like to see between plan and however, something to the effect of when done with regular and reasonable prices for goods and services. Or
Again,
actual pricing.
I would have to refer to Legislative Council. That's kind of above my pay grade.
On page 117, or the next line on page 4, there says may recover reasonable prices, which isn't covered in the previous section, and I'd like to see if that couldn't be actual cost. And then finally, there's some things in there about local governments that I'm not sure how funded, but finally, if I may, on the last page, and I get it because we've got to have some teeth in this, Madam Chairwoman, we've got a section here that says in section 3 about a natural person and the violation of what happens 10 years and 25,000. And just as a whistleblower provision, the previous section, which you'd find on page 7 in section C, it says, line 239, the commissioner shall have all the powers and duties pursuant to investigate such a matter. And my thinking there is, what if I knew about it and did nothing?
I think
Like
that-
Penn State football,
Yeah.
or the Catholic Church, or somebody else. And so I'm just sitting there going, if we have a standard on the next page with actually having fines and figures in it, I would like any of those people that actually knows it goes on and chose to do nothing to also have some degree of accountability. I don't know what the fixes are, but I just appreciate you listening to me mentioning these kind of things that on the surface bother me.
Well, I think it was given the power of the insurance commissioner to be able to investigate these, and they already have some existing powers for fraud, waste, and abuse in the insurance commissioner's office. But
Well, we also know there's some cases in the insurance office where,
yeah, they don't get investigated.
I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Yes, we're on the same page. And your purpose isn't to allow an agency or anybody else to look the other way.
And
That
that's
undermines the
exactly
intent.
right. And that's why the Attorney General is the ultimate power, that if there was fraud, waste, and abuse, that it would be referred to him.
I would
Yes.
just like some teeth, Madam Chairwoman, that says, if we find anybody looking the other way, we're going to invest, this is serious, at the highest levels, then you know what, they need to be held accountable, just like the person that's trying to provide the service. That's just food for thought. Madam Chair, I'm done with my concerns.
Okay. This is a hearing, so if you can write those down in between now and going forward about what you would like to suggest. You went through that very quickly.
Thank you.
Okay, who else have I got? Other questions from the committee? Representative Pizzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, on line 60, of course referring to the previous lines, said the code section shall not apply to, and I just made notes so I don't have to flip back and forth, group practices, consultation fees, commissions, payments under a health benefit plan, Medicaid, Medicare, insurance, advertising, gifts, and it kind of goes on. So who would it apply to? And I'm not in the healthcare field. I sell cheap hamburgers, so you got to break it down for me.
Well, that's actually language. We, like I said from the beginning, we didn't want to interfere with current referral patterns. And the Hospital Association and the different substance abuse facilities wanted that language included. But I think what we're trying to go after is the nefarious groups that come in. Obviously, when you have an epidemic, there's an infusion of money, either from the states or the feds that are coming in. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the other states with that infusion of money, you have unscrupulous people that come in, try to make money on it. Who else would go to a homeless shelter and try to recruit people to go to another state except to make money on them? And that's a very fine, I guess you would call, minute amount of people that you're going after, but it's no different than human trafficking that we've been working on for 10 years. These people, even though they're addicted to a substance, they're still victims, and they can be victimized because they're not thinking correctly, or else they wouldn't be addicted. And oftentimes it's the families, and I had several families where boys, men that are 20 to 25 year old are recruited, and and it's been in the newspaper, where they go to Florida, they're promised a panacea. You're going to get off your drugs, you're going to be in Florida, you're going to be near the palm trees and the ocean, and you're going to come off of your substance. But when they get down there, and I have the newspaper articles and the magazine articles where the Attorney General in Florida calls them flop houses. They get there, they're pushed into a room. Oftentimes they are, yes, they may go through withdrawal and get off their substance, but then people come back in and offer them another substance, and they're victimized the second time. I actually had a mother whose son died down there, and it was on one of the TV stations of where he was taken to, I think it was West Palm Beach. And it's not a good business to be in. It's very sad. But that's the answer to your question is, there are a lot of exemptions because we do not want to disrupt these patterns. A great example is Northeast Georgia Hospital in Gainesville has a hospital system, but then right next door they have a very nice behavioral system. And you want to make sure that flow of patients, they still refer when someone comes into the emergency room, they've overdosed, and they want to go to the behavioral health center right next door. You don't want to interfere in those referral patterns. But the nefarious ones where people are coming from out of state and recruiting, and believe me, I never would have thought of this. I had never heard of patient brokering before. But it is a very common term in the substance abuse community that it does occur.
Does the language, the penalties mentioned in this bill, does that mirror federal code?
Yes, it does. That's what I was talking about. Ms. Whitten made sure, and it also, we actually called down to Florida and have talked to several people within state government in Florida about if their law is working, because they've had, this is March, they've had about, I don't know how many months to see if their law is working, and so far they've been satisfied, because I wanted to make sure if I'm copying their law and it is in effect now, that if there's anything that needs to be changed in Florida, I wanted to make sure that I changed it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Silcox.
And I did not, Madam Chair, I did not bring all this background information. I'll be glad to furnish it. I didn't want to prolong, but I did put on the desk of the Senate specific examples, and I did not ask for all these mothers to come and testify. If you want them to come, they can come, but I figured it was the end of session, and
Fine.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Okay. Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Underwood, for bringing this to our committee. This is such a huge problem in our state and across the country. And as I've shared with you before, two of my nieces have been involved in substance abuse, so this is very, very dear to my heart. So I appreciate it. Was curious on setting up the commission. Understand that you actually passed legislation that created the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council.
yes,
That's
and I've
already-
served on it, and Katie Dempsey, Representative Dempsey, serves with me, and we've served now about 4 years.
And I guess I'm just curious, would this be a job that they, that we already have a council already set up that they could accomplish?
That's a very good question, but, the Lieutenant Governor created the Innovation Center, which you've already, I'm not sure if y'all have taken that up yet. Have y'all taken the Health Innovation Center? Have y'all taken that up
I
yet?
don't.
Yes.
Dean Birch,
Okay.
yes, we've passed it
Okay.
out.
So the goal is, and that's a great question because I didn't understand that either. These two bills were passed in the Senate compatibly, and that's probably why it's a little bit confusing. But this Commission on Substance Abuse and Recovery goes up underneath the Innovation Center,
Okay.
which will be housed in rural Georgia.
Okay. So, and I guess the behavioral health is,
Actually, the
here.
behavioral health goes underneath that too.
it does. Okay.
Yes, and
okay.
there's multiple task force and agents, councils that will fit under it too, if you go back and read Senator Burke's bill.
And these are being called, Senator, innovation centers for what reason? Or this is being called
Well, that's
an
the
innovation,
The Health Innovation Center.
and
That came out of the Lieutenant Governor's Healthcare Task Force. And
meaning new programs and looking at new things, or
well,
what?
the main, and I'm sure Senator Burke can explain it better than I can, but the main purpose is all these silos, and you've seen there's been 3 bills about data integration and data analytics. And it's because our state has become so siloed that there is no one looking over the totality of like an epidemic. Public health does statistics. Behavioral health does the mental health part of it. The Board of Education does prevention and
Right.
education.
Right.
Corrections does the people that get in trouble or peddle the drugs. I mean, this affects every single agency, and that's why the bill is such an omnibus bill and tries to address the epidemic. And when we looked at other states, this is exactly how other states have had to handle it. And if you look at $60 billion that hopefully is coming down from the feds, you do need that oversight and regulation, in my opinion.
And that's 60 billion would be gone through this committee?
Well, the
this
$60 billion is for the whole United States, for every state,
Right.
and we will get a portion.
portion of it.
Just like we got the 11.5 million, which is currently housed in DBHDD and also in public health.
So
And-
whatever we got would be housed with this,
Yes,
under this.
yes, and I believe the whole thing is also in, if you look at line 128 in the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, shall report directly to the governor.
Okay, why would it be attached to something in South Georgia? Not that they don't have their drug problems, but when we're having so many problems in Metro Atlanta and in the northern arc.
Well, it's for the whole state, and I believe the Innovation Center, as I recall from Dr. Burke, that it is housed in either Middle Georgia, and it'll be university affiliated.
Okay.
But I agree, it really doesn't matter, today's world, where things are housed with the internet and everything.
And
Trying to get the council to meet.
Can indulge me, I would
Okay,
appreciate it. I
right.
had another question. That is, on section 3 of the bill,
Mhm.
was curious, the phrase high-tech drug testing.
Yes.
I was curious if, that just seems to be very broad. I mean, high-tech drug testing could encompass a whole lot of different things.
Well, unfortunately, that's what's happening. Most of the time, it's urine testing that is most commonly abused. And I actually, I was very fortunate the chairman did the bill about over-the-counter testing. There's a lot of testing because families are trying to take control of whoever their addicted person is.
Right.
And evidently, this is the same language that is used in the existing code.
Okay. Well, and along those lines, down the provisions down in section 2, I guess I'd be concerned, having sat on the non-civil judiciary committee and heard some of the testimony from the GBI, that a lot of these people are taking multiple drugs.
Yes.
So I guess I wouldn't want to discourage drug testing on any level with these penalties, because a lot of these situations are extremely complex and they're
Right.
taking a whole cocktail of drugs.
And they're taking synthetic drugs that, are not prescription drugs, and that's where you get into the analogs. And we're very fortunate with the GBI having experts on those specific drug testings, but they're also very costly.
But I think they're necessary.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Okay. Representative Newton.
Madam Chair and Senator, thank you for this. I do
Mhm.
see this, both the patients and the families in an emergency department regularly who are devastated by
Mhm.
this problem we're trying to help solve. If you can look in section 3, where it's similar to what Representative Silcox was talking about, the Fraudulent Insurance Act definition was excessive, high-tech, or fraudulent drug testing and it talks about the elderly, but any individual affected by pain or substance abuse. I know the Federation of State Medical Boards has a kind of a model policy that talks about testing and with synthetic and semi-synthetic opioids being available. I'm just curious if there's a clearer definition of what's excessive, because if someone has some results that come back, what they call the red flags of some non-prescribed drugs showing up, or additional prescribed semi-synthetic or materials showing up, they can do more frequent testing as part of the contract with a pain patient. Or
Right.
what is excessive though, and then is high tech, would that include checking out not just for opioids but for all the different kinds, the difference between prescribed oxycodone
Well,
versus non-prescribed fentanyl showing
From
up?
working with the accountability court judges, and they order a lot of this testing, and Ms. Witten is also over the insurance committee, and it's my understanding that this language is the same language from the insurance code.
Is there any kind of a safe harbor if you follow a model, say the Federation of State Medical Board model, or do you know if that's what I've seen is some doctors drop out of this because of the fear, and especially now this is a felony with $25,000 per patient fine. I've seen doctors, and then the patients are left with no recourse, and I'll tell you, they come to the emergency department because they don't know what else to do. They're on medications that have been prescribed properly in large doses, and they just show up. And when the doctors suddenly drop out of doing this, that can be a problem for the patients as well. So I was looking to see if there was a way to be more precise, that the physician would know that the high-tech test wasn't, I'm not doing a high-tech test, I'm not doing excessive when I say once a month or randomly once every 2 months.
I know that we have existing laws because I know DCH regulates the methadone treatment centers and the day programs, and I actually got a waiver for the program in Dahlonega because they were doing overnight stays and giving the Vivitrol and other medications, and that hasn't been done in the state of Georgia, and I was very fortunate to get DCH to give a waiver for that. So I think it is covered. If you know of something different than Ms. Witten, I keep referring to her because she's legislative counsel, and she does know the insurance code very well. I'd be glad to look at it, but that question did not arise in the Senate.
Well, thank you.
Did you talk to the physicians that are treating these people
Yes, I did. That was
about the testing?
the guy that came to visit with me from Dahlonega is one of the leading addictionologists in the United States, and he was at the VA and at Emory, and he decided, like a lot of doctors do, to go make money, and opened up and bought this lodge with capitalists that put money in and funded it, and bought a lodge up in Dahlonega. And he's one of the ones that I worked with because he was at the VA for years and years and years and did some of the original substance abuse programs at the VA here in Atlanta. And he's one of the ones that helped me with this language to make sure that we're not infringing. Just like I was talking about the referral patterns, we're not trying to change and go after what the families told me in all these forums I had is that by way of making money off of the epidemic, that a lot of people move in and start, and if you go to the zone, I met with some of the people there where they do recurrent testing. You know, you could do the drug testing, the urinalysis once a week, but instead they were doing it 2 and 3 times a week, and they're very, very expensive and very lucrative. They call it liquid gold, and there's been some television stories that they've done on television about how much money in these lab testing can be made. There's actually more money, I think, in the lab testing than there is in actually taking care of the patient.
Okay. Have we had incidents of this in our state?
Yes, we have, and that's what the families complained about, and that's why we actually have an ethicist a person who's trained in ethical referral patterns, and she actually helped me with this bill.
Okay, Representative Peake.
And there's also a Facebook page on that. If you want to look at the Facebook page, there's so many families that have been abused. They have a Facebook page. And it's very enlightening to listen to their stories.
You pass? Okay, Representative Jaspers.
Yes, ma'am. Right here.
Mhm.
And Chairman, thank you for being in your committee the other day. I just had a couple of questions, Madam Chairman. You worked with Senator Mullis on SB 88, the addiction
Yes.
bill last year.
Yeah.
And through all that, I think I learned that I thought public health had been charged by the governor to create a statewide plan.
Yes.
What's the difference between that, and I think you're on that, and then what you're doing here? I mean, I think that's
Yep.
their goal, and
Yep.
it seems similar to this.
Well, if I could refresh your memory, and I'll try to do it correctly, it's getting a little late in the day, but we did move the PDMP, if you'll recall, from the Georgia Drugs and Narcotics Agency. And we moved it over into public health. And we also gave public health quite a bit more money. And now they have a person that is in charge of the opioid statistics. And the PDMP and those agents are now located in public health. But the problem is, when I started working on this, then you go to the GBI. And then you go to, like, when we had the outburst in Macon, where we started seeing all these people this past summer who had the overdoses all at one time. And I'm working with the GBI on creating heat maps and applications on telephones of overdose incidences. So then you go to the Board of Education, the State Board of Education, and ask them what they're doing. So everywhere you go, and then you go to the accountability courts, and they're working on it, and then you go to the supervision programs, they're working on it. Everywhere you go, everybody has a niche in it, but nobody knows what the other ones are doing, and they're all asking for specific money. And the whole problem to me is that duplication of services and overriding, and everybody wanting a piece of the pie, but nobody knows what the other piece of the pie is doing. And that's the reason to have the umbrella and to have more or less what you call a drug czar. And when I looked at other states, that's exactly what other states were doing, is kind of delving down to the silos and getting the silos together and the integration.
Yeah, similar to Dr. Burke's idea. Okay, now, on the $60 billion, you need water?
No,
You need
fine.
some- The,
It's
is
a
that,
ballot.
is that related to any kind of acceptance of a Medicaid waiver, or that 60 billion, I guess is what I'm concerned about, or just curious about, that you mentioned a time or two there?
Well, the only thing I know is what you know, because I read the newspapers, I read the internet, and I understand what the feds are supposed to be doing, and Congress is supposed to be allocating that amount of money, and the HHS person the other day said that, yes, they are allocating the money. The question is, we need the money yesterday and not,
And how much
tomorrow or the next year. And that's why I said this bill sets the foundation when we can drop down that money and use it more effectively. Because after working on this issue, I've been working on this issue for 3 years, I found that there are those silos and they're not working together. And if you ever start asking questions, what did I do when the mother calls me with a 22-year-old kid, and where can that boy go to get help? And unfortunately, the CSBs are full. The crisis intervention is full. They end up sitting in the emergency room. They overdose. They take their Narcan. They're put back out on the street. And that's one of the main things that's lacking is intervention in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Do we have, that's questions from the committee. Do we have anybody in the audience? Do we have a sign-up sheet? It's down there. Nobody signed up? Okay. Identify yourself.
Madam Chair, I'm Tim Kibler with the Georgia Alliance of Community Hospitals, and we very much support this legislation and would ask the committee at the appropriate time to favorably consider it and pass it forward. We've worked with the sponsor and the chair lady of this committee as well for several years on the opioid epidemic, and feel like this is a very responsible next step. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, okay.
Hi, Anna Adams with the Georgia Hospital Association. I want to also offer our support on this legislation and to thank Chairman Unterman for working with us to make sure that hospitals could comply with the anti-kickback section of this bill, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank
Okay,
you.
so that she's taking care of the hospital.
She's taking
issue.
care of every Medicare and Medicaid provider. We worked with the Nursing Home Association as well to come up with language that worked so that we could comply with this while not being in violation of the federal anti-kickback statutes.
Okay. Representative Hawkins, do you have something from?
I just want to thank the senator for all her work. I know you've been up to Hall County and all over the state, and you've listened to a lot of folks, a lot of thoughts going into this bill, and I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Representative Newton, did you have a question?
Thank you. Do you mind, if you don't mind, if I had one quick question
No,
also?
it's fine.
On line 166, it talks about the meetings of that commission. There's the Behavioral Health, DBHDD, Commissioner of Public Health, Community Health. Those are all the commissioners, and I think it says they can't be represented by a delegate, and they have to meet at least quarterly. I think that includes the Commissioner on Insurance, the Attorney General, Director of GBI. That's an impressive meeting. Is that do you ever see that being a problem, getting a quorum there with the many duties that list and with no delegates?
You know, I do belong, and Representative Dempsey and I do go to these meetings with the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council. If you don't put that in there, they don't take it seriously,
Okay.
and they won't come. But they do come to the, and have been very good. You know, she and I can't go when we're in session, but we do go or phone in, and it's been very beneficial. Madam Chair, I did. In the Senate, I had letters of support, and I'll submit these to you from
Okay.
all the different big groups that wrote letters of support, if you don't mind.
Right. That's all the question. Have any other questions from the committee? This is a hearing only. I know that that Representative Reiner certainly has questions, and any from anybody else about specifics in the bill, if you would bring them to me. Senator Unterman, thank you for bringing the bill. You know, opioids, I think I brought the first bill about opioids and the 911 bill, and it's a big issue with me. I also have issues about the elderly, and I have a little bill sitting over in your committee, and also about step therapy for patients who have been made to fail on medications, and trying to do something about that. I know that there's other House members that have bills over there and would like to have hearings, and their bill's not held up. So might take that into consideration if you would, please. But thank
Okay.
you for doing that.
Alrighty, thank you for listening. I sure do appreciate y'all today.
Thank you. Okay. All right. If the committee were going to pass on, we gotten a little ahead of ourselves with Representative Mathiak's because it hasn't been read twice. So we're just going to hold off on that. We got a question? Oh, all right. Thank you. Okay, and I would like for the committee to hang with me for our invited guest. Didn't think we were going to be meeting this late, but I think you may want to hear that since we seem to have a rise in members that are having family members that have malignancies and are facing really hard times. And so they came to me. This is not about a product that Bristol Myers produces. It's about the current trends in cancer research and their trials, and I think everybody might find this really interesting. So, you're speaking?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairwoman Cooper. I'm Joe Ritchie. I am a senior field medical scientist with Bristol Myers Squibb. I have some slides we'll go through. My role with the company is really on the research side. So I cover all our portion of 5 states here in the Southeast, Georgia being one of my main states. And really my role is to work with our clinical investigators, so the Emorys, the big health systems in the state that are involved in clinical trials with BMS products. And one area that we're really focused on in bringing forward is really a new treatment modality for cancer patients, and that's immuno-oncology. I think you've probably all seen the commercials airing during the Super Bowl. Everybody knows about Jimmy Carter's story. This is really a new treatment modality for these patients, very different than what has traditionally been used. So we really have a strong educational effort to get out and talk about what this actually is and what it means for patients. So I've got a short few slides. I think I may be what's holding everyone from getting out to the car before the rain starts. So I will jump into this real quick. So looking here, again, this is highlighting the traditional treatment process for oncologies. Surgery, you're cutting the tumor out. Radiation, you're burning the tumor out. Chemotherapy, targeted therapy, you're essentially poisoning the tumor. Immuno-oncology is different, okay? So it's targeting the patient's immune system. It's enabling that immune system to respond to the tumor. So it's really fundamentally different in that it's not targeting the tumor. Doesn't matter what the tumor is. It's enabling the immune system to respond. So it's a very different approach than what we've done, for the last 200 years in terms of treatment options for patients with cancer. Why do we need this, right? That's the big question. So this is data that's pulled from SEER, so it's a national database on outcomes with patients that have cancer. I really just focus on the bar graphs. Those are 5-year survival rates as of about 2016 for some of the more common cancer types in the United States. Lung cancer, look at that, less than 5%. Melanoma, kidney cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. These are all tumor types that I think everybody in this audience either has a loved one, maybe themselves have gone through treatments for cancer, a friend or family member. This is where immuno-oncology is seeking to fill the gap. We can get quick responses with surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, but we really haven't made a dent in improving long-term survival for these cancer patients. Just a quick update. So for a few of these tumor types that have shown an early signal with some of our clinical trials, not just Bristol Myers Squibb clinical trials, but the industry in general, we're starting to see some significant improvement in these 5-year overall survival. So lung cancer, again, about 4%. We had some recent data that was presented from a clinical trial setting, and we're now seeing survival outcome about 16 to 20%. So a pretty big jump, although still has a big gap to fill, but definitely making some advancement there. So again, immuno-oncology research is really focused on understanding how the immune system interacts with the cancer cells and how we can shift the balance or drive that anti-tumor immune response and allow that patient's immune system to mount that anti-tumor response. So it sounds very snake oil salesmanish, but it really makes sense when you dig into the science. So this is just a brief history, just to highlight that this field of immuno-oncology or immunotherapy has actually been around for quite some time. Really the first documented use of an immunotherapy to treat a disease is really the smallpox vaccination in the late 1700s. And from there, we've had a number of different discoveries related to the immune system and cancer, whether it was finding that certain cancer types have inflammation associated with it. There was a physician by the name of James Coley that found when he took some bacteria and injected it into tumor, he could elicit an inflammatory response, and this actually led to tumor regression in certain cancer patients. And again, a number of different discoveries that have really enabled our research and also the tools that have allowed us to develop some of these therapies that are currently on the market and that we're working with our collaborators, both academic and industry, to really improve the outcomes of these patients. So just to highlight there, just to show the excitement in this field, it's when you look at clinicaltrials.gov, which again is the registry for all of the ongoing clinical trials right now, there's close to 1,500 ongoing clinical trials in oncology focusing on immunotherapy. So this is definitely something that's really here to stay, and hopefully we'll see those continued impacts and benefits for cancer patients. I'm going to skip over this slide because it really goes into more nitty-gritty about the immune system. Really, the important thing to note is our immune system is extremely complex. I think some of the physicians I work with at Emory and at UAB, when you ask them what their immunology textbooks was back when they were in med school, they tell you it was about this thick. Now it'd probably be this thick. So this just really highlights that there's a lot of opportunities by understanding how these different players interact within our immune system and how they interact with cancer cells. Opportunities for us to develop strategies to again, shift that balance back to favor that patient's immune system. And this is a perfect slide. So this is what we call the cancer immunity cycle. So you see on the left the elimination phase. This is basically where the immune system is functioning. It's doing its job. It's recognizing when a cancerous cell populates, and it eliminates it. You probably never know that the cancer cell popped up. As with cancer cells, they're smart and they can adapt. So whatever immune cell may be attacking them, they may develop strategies to evade that, and that's when we have escape, immunoescape. This is basically when the tumor becomes clinically apparent and our immune system is no longer able to eliminate that cancer cell. And there are many different pathways by which this can occur, so our continued understanding of how this process works will allow us to identify new strategies to mount that immune
So
response.
you're saying that we have cancer cells that attack our body, and our immune system stops them without us ever knowing them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very interesting, yes. But that's
But
the role.
sometimes it can't stop them.
Sometimes it can't, and that may be when the tumor emerges and we're seeing the oncologist. So this is again another nice slide that really shows how complex our immune system is. So in the context of a normal immune response, let's say to a bacteria or a virus, there are activating pathways which turn the immune system on, and then once it's able to eliminate that threat, there are pathways built into our immune system that shuts that immune system off. Because you don't want a prolonged inflammatory response. That's when you have autoimmune type disease and you can start attacking normal tissue. Well, these are also pathways that the tumor can hijack to use to evade an immune response. So again, it's an intricate balance of turning the immune cells on and turning them off. And a lot of times the cancer cells can do a very good job at turning our immune system off. So we've seen numerous times where when you look at a section of a patient's tumor, a biopsy, that they may have immune cells surrounding the tumor, but they're not able to be activated. And that's because of the signals that the tumor is making to shut that immune response off. I'll skip that slide. So this is a nice little slide that kind of, again, highlights how our body recognizes the tumor cells and it eradicates it. So again, on the left, you see the tumor. It's making what we call tumor antigens. These are proteins that are unique to the tumor. Our immune system, step 2, is able to recognize it, and in most cases via one of the cells, the T cells, which I like to call those are like the special forces of our immune system. They go out and they're highly trained and highly effective at eliminating that threat. And then again, as the tumor cells die, they release additional antigens. And what's great about the immune system is, let's say it does, in this case, clear the tumor cell. Well, that unique immune response doesn't go away. We have memory immune cells which stick around in case that threat ever pops back up again. So this is what's really great about the immune system is it's adaptable and it's able to learn from its experience. So think of it as like your spam filter on your email. You get spam. You may get some that pops through, you mark it as spam, so it also adapts and learns how to recognize new spam as it comes through. This slide is really just meant to highlight, again, some of the differences between endpoints in immuno-oncology research. So when these endpoints were brought forth initially, they were brought forth to support development of chemotherapy or radiation or surgery. And because of these drugs, they work differently, immuno-oncologists work differently. It may take time to get the immune system to kick on. We have to look at really the gold standard, and that's the impact on overall survival. So you may hear some press releases or see some news blurbs about how the response rate for this immunotherapy may not be as good as the response rate for a chemotherapy. But the big picture to look at is what impact does it have on that patient's long-term survival. And we've seen it time and time again through a lot of clinical trials that show that the longer you follow these patients that get the immunotherapy, their long-term response, their long-term survival is trending more positive than what we've seen traditionally with chemotherapy. So, oftentimes when you're talking to some oncologists when this field was initially evolving, they thought, this doesn't have broad applicability. There's only a few tumors that are termed immunogenic. And in fact, when we look back through a lot of the basic science, looking at just simply, is an immune response noted? Are there presence of immune cells in tumor biopsies? You can see on the list, I know it's hard to see, but there's really pretty much all tumor types, solid and heme, have some immune component to it. So it's really just understanding that unique immune response to those specific tumors, and the potential for immuno-oncology is very broad, and maybe not just lung, melanoma, and kidney cancer, but a lot of different tumors to hopefully impact a lot of different patients. So this is the last slide. Really just wanted to highlight that immuno-oncology, again, is a very different modality than what we've traditionally used. It really holds the promise of potentially improving the long-term survival, which is the most important aspect. You know, we can get a response with some drugs, but if it doesn't improve that patient's long-term survival and their quality of life, then it doesn't really do anything. So hopefully, as we continue to learn and better understand through clinical trials, through partnerships with academic centers like Emory, we can continue to shift the bar and improve that overall survival for not just a select group of cancer patients, but hopefully the broad majority. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Well, I have questions. With most of the immune therapies, do they have the bad side effects that so many of the chemotherapies have? Do people lose their hair? Are they really nauseated? You know, do they wipe out their white blood cells? All the kind of things that make the patient, the cancer patient, you know, have problems with infections at all.
So they have their own unique set of side effects. As you can think, if you're turning the immune system on, there are noted cases, and if you look at the package insert for any of these drugs, immune-related side effects. We don't see the hair falling out. There are GI issues that can occur. There are different mechanisms of actions, but the management is usually a short course of corticosteroids to actually dampen down the immune response. I think the important thing to think about is, again, how is the mechanism working? It's different. We're not poisoning necessarily the tumor. This is directed at the immune system. So as long as we catch it early, it can be managed pretty effectively. We also include in all of our clinical trials health outcomes, quality of life, and time again when we have an immunotherapy compared to a chemotherapy, quality of life and outcomes, health-related outcomes, improves for those patients that are on the immunotherapy arm, whereas traditionally with the chemotherapy it beats them up. So a lot of times we hear physicians say patients are tolerating well, there's no issues, but there are rare cases where you can have that severe immune type reaction. But the good thing is there's standardized management algorithms for managing those patients.
Other questions from the committee? I sort of brought this because I don't remember how many of y'all will remember Gail Johnson, who lobbied for AT&T, has a nephew by marriage, and who they said that was terminal, and was able to get one of these therapies for him. He had brain cancer and lung cancer and bone cancer, and all he wanted to do was to live to see his only child graduate from high school, which was about 14, 15 months out. He has gotten this now. The lung cancers are inactive. The brain cancer is inactive, and the boy graduated in May. The worst thing he has experienced, which I think is totally non-related, he's become a severe diabetic along the way, and had a little trouble getting regulated on his diabetes. So, and I would think on the most part would say that his quality of life has been a lot better than one of the others, so it's of great interest. And what you're saying is that they're of these 1,500 studies, are they pretty much doing it on all types of cancer?
Pretty much. And there are even, for the really rare tumor types, the NCI is running studies that are specifically designed at patients with rare tumors that necessarily wouldn't fit into a large phase 3 clinical trial that a pharma company can run. So if there's a tumor type, there's very likely an immuno-oncology study ongoing for that tumor type.
Got any specific on pancreatic cancer? We have a specific case we're interested in here at the Capitol.
Pancreatic has been one of the challenging tumors for immunotherapies, and a lot of times it's because it's felt to be one of the less immunogenic. So where active research now is looking at is how can you take these tumors, which we call them cold tumors, and turning them hot. So there was some new data with another immuno-oncology agent that was presented back at the Society of Immunotherapy meeting back in the fall that actually showed some pretty impressive response rates. Now it is phase 1 data, so it's very early, but it's got a lot of people interested, and I know that clinical trial is moving into phase 2. So there are efforts underway for those very difficult to treat tumors, and we're starting to see these newer agents have promise.
But there's no medicine, or there's not one of the
Not FDA approved.
with the type thing. Okay, and I have one more question, if there's nothing from the committee before I let you go. There was, a few years ago, an article that made the scientific things about a young man in high school who had a family friend who came down with pancreatic cancer. And one of the problems we have is because it's usually diagnosed very, very late and there's no test for it. And he got concerned. This is a high school student. And apparently very bright parents and some of their friends were researchers and they let him use his lab. And he came up with a way to test that from blood. Do you know whatever? And I know that a company bought it. And so it was so good. It got to the point where a company did buy it for further testing. Do you know what happened?
I'm familiar with that story. He was looking at like circulating tumor cells within the blood, trying to detect early. So there are a number of companies that are not just for pancreatic cancer, but looking at using blood when, like, you go in for your routine checkup at your primary care physician. Looking at, can we take blood and look in the blood for the presence of tumor cells to try to catch it before, like it's when it's a stage 1 and surgery is effective. I'm not sure if there's any that are currently FDA approved. There's some that you can probably get as a just a laboratory diagnostic test, but not sure if there's any that are like FDA approved and supported for routine screening.
But there are some that are being studied, companies that are studying them in the approval process, so that we could catch these cancers perhaps a lot earlier when there would be something that could be done about them.
Absolutely, that's one of the when you think about ways to improve outcomes, it's early detection and then improving the therapies for those that have later stage disease. So that's definitely on the forefront for a lot of these companies.
Representative Silcox.
I was just going to say that it was interesting because I attended a meeting for the General Assembly last spring in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Novair actually talked about a drug where they took all of the blood out of this young lady who had certain indications for leukemia, and they trained her blood to use immunotherapy essentially to attack the antibodies and basically eat up. So they took all of her blood out of her. They trained her blood. They put her blood back in her, and her own blood ate up all of the leukemia, which was phenomenal. And then I read in the Wall Street Journal in the fall that the drug was approved for the treatment. I believe it's about $750,000, which was still extremely expensive, but less than what the analyst expected. But just was really excited to hear those kinds of things coming about.
Absolutely. That's what she's referred to as therapy called CAR-T, which, like you said, you can take out the patient's immune cells in the blood and re-engineer it and drive it to attack the cancer. So it's really exciting, especially for patients with blood cancers.
Let's get this specific. I mean, they weren't taking out all her blood. They were taking
correct.
out...
Isolating out the circulating lymphocytes. Yeah.
No, she had a transfusion, but they did take out the majority of her blood.
Right. So they're able to take the blood out. They have to, because you've got to imagine there's not a lot of these lymphocytes in the blood. So it is a transfusion of sorts. But yes, they weren't.
But that's not necessary in all of these that are coming.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
There we go. So they might be a little bit more affordable, and
Correct.
I think the one that I spoke about, I think is about, I don't know, I think at the time something like $18,000 a year, but that may not be, I may have it all totally wrong on how much it cost. It was much more in the price range that somebody might be able to afford it.
Right.
And I may have the price wrong.
Well, you got to imagine with a therapy like that, that takes, you have to admit the patient in the hospital, collect their blood, send it off to a lab. With some of the other outpatient administered drugs, it's a little bit easier to administer.
And I will say, we like to beat up on the drug companies, and we think they're terrible, but they do have programs. And Gail's nephew had always worked all his life and had a kind of insurance he bought through Obamacare, and it wasn't accepted by the hospital or the pharmacies. And, I will be forever thankful because a drug company responded to my request and has a program where sometimes when people can't afford it, they will get drugs, even when they're really expensive like that. And I can tell you that Gail and her family, and the fact that he got to see his son graduate from high school and now is going in the Air Force and is very, very bright, and they really wanted him and going on to college through the Air Force means a whole lot. So I appreciate the companies that are willing to work with patients like that and all this research that's happening. Are there any other questions? If not, I thank my committee. I thank you for coming.
Absolutely, thank you for
And
having
with the
us.
presentation, and I thank the committee for being so attentive and listening. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.